NCAA's new logo. NIL. Name, image, likeness. Hey everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you back to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. I know I started off with the college NIL, but this week I want to devote finally some time to something that I've been promising the viewers for a number of seasons here, and that is a look back at the 1966 game of the century between the Michigan State Spartans and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And it was played, of course, in East Lansing, Michigan. November 19th, 1966 was the game. And the reason why I'd like to review this, first of all, if you love defense, it was a great game. Number of interceptions, a number of tackle for losses, some sacks, some fumble recoveries, pretty much penalty free on both sides of the scrimmage line. But Notre Dame, really, it's a wild thing because they were actually down in this game 10-0 and rally and pull off, quote unquote, the tie. And rather than remark about injuries really hurting them, both their punter and their kicker, field goal kicker, were basically new to their positions or first time they were trying it out in the actual season. Notre Dame has been blistered by the press. In fact, I'm going to read you one of the quotes from Dan Jenkins, a writer who I loved from the old Sports Illustrated magazine. And he had said this: put the number one team, Notre Dame, on its own 30-yard line with time for at least 4 passing plays to break the tie. A number one team will try something, won't it, to stay that way? Notre Dame did not. Now, great article, okay? I understand where Dan Jenkins was coming from, that they probably should have played for the win or tried to win the game, but you have to review and see everything in context of the time. First of all, Notre Dame, let's take a look at the history of the teams. Notre Dame was fresh off a national championship in 1964. Michigan State had won, 10 wins, including a win over Notre Dame the previous season, 1965, before losing in the Rose Bowl to the number 5 team UCLA that year. Actually, Michigan State went into the Rose Bowl in 65 as the number 1 team and lost the game, of course, in an upset. I think Gary Beeman might have been the UCLA quarterback. They lost the game 14-12. Now, I know the Big Ten has historically not always done all the best out in Southern California with the Rose Bowl, and they always seem to have come up a little bit short in the bigger games, the ones that really mean something. I'm thinking about 74 and 75, or the 75 and 76 Rose Bowls for the 74-75 seasons, when Ohio State lost a big game out there. 72 when USC won with Lynn Swann as their big wide receiver over Ohio State. Then there were a couple other games that they lost in the Rose Bowl just recently, and this is when the Rose Bowl kind of changed, or the venue kind of changed with the new playoff system. TCU upset a big favorite Wisconsin team. TCU was led by Andy Dalton, who went on to play for the Bengals for a number of seasons. So the Big Ten, from a historical perspective, at least when I was growing up, 60s, 70s, and all the rest of it, they seem to always come up short, from my perspective, in the big games in the Rose Bowl. Same thing happened in 65, Michigan State. They lost to UCLA. Now, they come back in 66, looking for some redemption. They rack off 9 straight wins. And in fact, ready for this? Actually, let me give you some of the players of that team. Michigan State, I had done an earlier episode. Michigan State had not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 first-round draft picks in the 66/67 NFL draft. That was the first and only time that's ever occurred in the history of the NFL draft. And they had players who had really some really good careers. You had Bubba Smith, of course. Maybe a lot of the youngsters might know him from the Police Academy shows and also from the Miller Lite, remember It Tastes Great, less filling commercials of the late 70s. But Bubba, I was surprised at this, never made the Professional Football Hall of Fame, but Bubba Smith as a kid always kind of scared me because he always played for the teams I never rooted for, specifically the Baltimore Colts. And of course, and I'm going to tell you this right out, flat out, I'm rooting for Notre Dame in this game. I'm a huge Notre Dame fan in the 60s and 70s. But I always felt that for all of maybe the criticism I might give Notre Dame, and I try to be fair, I think, when it comes to the games and specific events, this one I always thought they got a raw deal. One, played on the road. Two, played in a packed house of Michigan State with some great players on both sides. George Webster. Now, the reason I had this card as a kid. That was the 3D card that came in the Kellogg's cereal boxes. I happen to have this card, and I happen to be Houston probably was my favorite AFC team. It's funny. With baseball, you usually have only one favorite team. Football, you seem to have a couple, usually in both leagues. So you cover kind of both bases. Well, I rooted for the Cowboys as a kid because my brother Jim was a huge Cowboy fan. And I did love Staubach. I loved Landry. I loved the nicknames that they used to give. And I'm going to do a show on that. The great defensive nicknames that they gave to teams in the 70s, like the Doomsday Defense, the Purple People Eaters of Minnesota, the Gold Rush came a little bit later for the 49ers, the Fearsome Foursome for the Rams. But this was George Webster, who was a solid player, not a Hall of Fame player, but nonetheless, I think he played at least 10 seasons in the league. So he was good. And, of course, I just love this because I love the Oilers uniforms, that Columbia blue. I love the oil derrick. They did have gray helmets, and then they switched over to white. But I love this. And you had Jimmy Ray, who was the mainstay on offense. He was the quarterback who ran pretty much, I would say, their option offense. He never made it in the pros. I think probably most teams wanted to convert him into a running back. He does go on later on, Jimmy Ray, to be a coach either at the high school or the lower college levels. But he was an excellent quarterback for Michigan State, did what Coach Duffy Daugherty wanted to do, secured the football, made some big passes, could run, could throw the option, could hand off, just was a great leader, which was, probably his biggest strength was the fact that he was a big leader. This is Gene Washington. Now, funny thing, when I was a kid, there were two Gene Washingtons in the NFL. One was number 18, Gene Washington for the 49ers. If you ever watch McMillan and Wife, he does guest in an episode or two in McMillan and Wife. And even Susan St. James, I believe that's the wife in McMillan and Wife, wears number 18, San Francisco 49er jersey, his jersey number during those seasons. But that Gene Washington, I believe, went to Stanford. This Gene Washington obviously went to Michigan State and then played a number of years for the Minnesota Vikings. What I didn't realize was this. When I was a kid, you don't realize this. Gene Washington, 49ers, was kind of small, about 5'10", 5'11". I never realized how big Gene Washington, the Minnesota wide receiver, was. He was about 6'4", 220. So he was a big guy and does play in the Super Bowl against the Kansas City Chiefs. Of course, this is Clint Jones, who would not only be a teammate of Gene Washington with the Spartans, but then would later play with Minnesota, with the Vikings. And then this is a fellow by the name of Al Brenner, who has some significant moments in the game itself. Now, Brenner, I think, does go to the pros, but I think he played with the Eagles, but certainly didn't have the career of the of Gene Washington, didn't have the career of George Webster, didn't have the career of Bubba Smith, or to a certain extent, Clint Jones. He was a valuable player for those Viking teams. Did a little bit of this, a little bit of that for those Viking teams, but never a real superstar. On the other side of the line of scrimmage, you have, of course, Terry Hanratty, Larry Conjure, who would play significant minutes in the 66 Battle of the Century. Terry Hanratty, who gets hurt pretty much in the opening moments of this game. Actually, and Chris Schenkel, who does the play-by-play, I remember Schenkel from the ABC with Bud Wilkinson. Man, they were a great tandem. And fair, right down the middle with their reports. Schenkel, of course, would do the Wide World of Sports. I also remember from doing the bowling championships. He would be the play-by-play for the bowling games that they would have on Wide World of Sports. But Schenkel was a really good announcer, obviously, especially in my mind, for the college football. And the color man was Bud Wilkinson, who I absolutely loved. Of course, Bud Wilkinson, the great coach at Oklahoma. And they were just tremendous. But Larry Conjure, he's in an Eagle uniform. I think he actually got hurt for the Eagles, so he doesn't have the career that you would expect. Hanratty, of course, played on a number of Steeler teams, and of course, he would be the backup for Terry Bradshaw. How about that? What are the odds of two Terrys playing and both being on the Super Bowl team? In fact, Hanratty, how weird is this? Hanratty against the Cowboys in their first meeting, I think it's Super Bowl IX, but it's 1976. He actually comes into play after Terry Bradshaw had thrown that big bomb. And, of course, he got leveled either by Cliff Harris or I think it was Cliff Harris that he got leveled at. And you could tell he had a concussion. Walks off, goes back into the locker room. Hanratty comes in for a few plays, actually does play, obviously, in the Super Bowl. And then Bradshaw comes back, but you can tell that his brain had to be jostled. And it does come out, I do believe, later. He played with a concussion. Cowboys, or the Steelers, do win that game 21-17. But Hanratty came into that game. I don't know whether he was on the following Steeler team, but Hanratty does play. He does get hurt in the game of the century. And then you have two other guys, Nick Eddy, who you will not hear in this game because he got hurt not in the game and not during practice, but they took a train from South Bend, 160 miles of East Lansing. I was just reading up on this. And getting out of the car, Eddy fell and hurt his shoulder and was unavailable for play. So you got 2/4, pretty much, maybe even 2/5, but one half of the starting backfield, quarterback and one of your running backs are both hurt before this big game. And that does come into play in terms of play calling, in terms of strategy, and all the rest of it. And yet, when you look, and it is mentioned, to be fair, by Dan Jenkins in the article, I think when you have half your backfield hurt, and then Terry Hanratty, of course, is replaced by Cole O'Brien. He's a diabetic, a bad diabetic, and didn't take his insulin shots, apparently, for the game. And as the game progresses, he gets more tired and exhausted. And you can actually, but there's no one to replace him. So he's got to stay out there. And considering everything, including this, actually, Chris Schenkel said that I think the sophomore is doing a great job. If you ever watch the YouTube version of this, they only have the second half. But you can hear Schenkel note that O'Brien, and nobody, I believe, was aware that O'Brien, I believe he forgot his insulin shots. And, of course, probably never told Parsegian, and goes out and plays really the game of his life and manages, and here's the other thing, Michigan State goes up early and secures a 10-0 halftime lead. So Notre Dame had to battle back against 80,000 crazy Michigan State fans who were loud, vociferous, partisan, and definitely did pump up the the Spartan defense and offense. He had to combat that. He had to combat the weather, cold, damp, 30-degree weather, typical November day. It's football weather, and he has to lead this team back, not to one score, but to two scores, and actually led them to a third drive in the second half. And it was only because the kicker missed a 31-yard field goal on a 4th and 17 that the game didn't wind up 13-10. But let's take a look. Here is Game of the Century. It makes the cover of Time magazine. Terry Hanratty and Jim Seymour, who was a wide receiver on that team. You have Bob Gladio, who does score the touchdown that puts Notre Dame down 10-7. And, of course, Rocky Bleier. And on the series I was just talking about, the missed field goal, he apparently was open on a pass, but it was deflected by Bubba Smith. He was wide open, probably would have secured the first down. At the very worst, it was about the 5 or 6 yard line. Notre Dame was stopped, great defense, and that is overlooked in this game. It was a great defensive battle. Every time each team kind of got on a roll, the defense would stiffen up and make a big play on both sides. And on this particular play, Bubba Smith, all 6'8" of them, just tipped the pass. And who knows what could have happened. But anyway, they missed the field goal. Now, here's another thing. I'll show you some more of players. Brian Stenger, I don't know much about him in his pro career. It seems like he does play for the Steelers. Of course, the great Alan Page, Hall of Famer. You know, he's a Supreme Court Justice in Minnesota, or was Supreme Court Justice. Got his law degree after he retired. Had a great career. He was from Ohio, was recruited by Notre Dame, becomes one of their foursomes on a defense that allowed 38 points all year, had 4 shutouts. And in this game held a Michigan State defense that averaged close to 30 points to 10 points. Now, on the reverse side, Notre Dame, number 1, I think, in scoring that year, averaged 39 points, was also held to 10. But in context, they're missing their starting quarterback. They're missing one of their big backs who never even enters the game because of the injury. He was derailed at the train station, okay? And then you have Jim Lynch. And I think Lynch might be in the Kansas City Hall of Fame, but I don't think he's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But, of course, these two, how about this? Teammates on the defense in college would be opponents in the 1970 Super Bowl won by the Kansas City Chiefs, which really cemented the AFL, now soon to be AFC, as a legitimate power in professional football ranks. Here's just a picture from the game. That's Larry Conger, I do believe, running against the really a tough Spartan defense. And, of course, here are the coaches. And I know that Duffy Daugherty was highly critical of Ara Parseghian, who won not 1, not 2, but 3 national championships at Notre Dame. But I'm going to give you a little context. I'm just going to give you the Notre Dame side of this from that perspective. And then if you say, hey, Notre Dame should have gone for the win, that's fine. I'm just going to put it in perspective. But anyway, just going over this, just to tell you, Michigan State, coming out of the Big Ten, their opponents were 48, 49, and 3. Notre Dame's was 54, 46, and 1. Purdue was 9 and 2 on the year. Would be number, I think they would finish in the top 10. In fact, when they played, they would finish number 9 when, or they were number 9 when Michigan State played them. So after the loss to Notre Dame, Purdue really revved up their season, their offense, and all the rest of it, so that when they met Michigan State, did lose the game 41-20. They were ranked number 9. So Michigan State met 2 teams that were in the top 10, and of course the tie with Notre Dame. So they were 1-0-1 against top 10 teams. Notre Dame played Oklahoma, which was number 10 at the time, and squashed them 38-0. This came after a victory over North Carolina, who was not having a good season, 32-0. And of course, Army, which was in one of their top seasons over the last 50 years, 8-2 that year. They lost to the Irish 35-0. And the coach of that team, I do believe, was former Riverdale coach Tom Cahill. Let me just check that. I just want to make sure, because I'm always in disbelief when I see that. So you can see what Notre Dame was dealing with, and how I think it's okay. You can take some criticism, but yeah, he was the Riverdale High School football coach before taking the Army job. Imagine that, jumping from high school to college. I remember when the Notre Dame coach, they did in '81 when he jumped from Moeller, Jerry Faust. Jerry Faust did the same thing with not the same success. Cahill had some pretty good years up at Army, but imagine going from high school to the military academy. Imagine going from high school to Notre Dame. Pretty steep, unbelievable jump. And for Cahill, he goes to Army, and he is successful in '66. They go 8-2. Actually, I believe on that team was a wide receiver by the name of Jim O'Toole. So that's why that team always is close to me. Northwestern, of course, was 3-6-1. Notre Dame beat them 35-7. Michigan State also played them and beat them 22-0 a week after Purdue. Then they beat, of course, their annual rival, Navy, 31-7. This is Notre Dame. Beat Purdue 40-0. Beat Duke 64-0. Both those teams were able to scrape together only 6 wins, going 6-14 together. And then, of course, you have the Michigan State 10-10 tie. Then they go off. And this is the real thing. I think this was the statement game. And this is another thing that you have to see in context. Ara Parseghian knew he had one more game. Made the annual trip every other year out to L.A., where they would play USC in the Coliseum. Of course, Notre Dame does go out to California. They either play, let's say, Stanford or USC. But this was the even year, so they go out and they play USC. Ara felt he could win, and he felt that if he could take away the tie here, he wouldn't get hurt by the pollsters too much. And he was right. Because after all, he is playing the number 2 team in the country. Now you fight them to a 10-10 battle at their place with all those injuries. That goes all into the calculus. And it was really, when you think about it, I'm gonna gloat a little bit, and I'm gonna praise Ara Parseghian. I think Ara Parseghian played this like a great chess master. He was like Bobby Fischer with the NCAA and the pollsters and with college football. And he knew that if he could go out to LA and defeat USC and John McKay, that things would be in good shape. Well, USC at the time was number 10 in the country when they met them. Notre Dame just didn't beat them. Notre Dame just didn't maul them. They demoralized USC 51-0. And in that game, it kind of was, he wins the battle, Ara Parseghian, against USC. But for the next 10 years, the next 7 years, John McKay would never forget that. And every time that he played Notre Dame, he didn't lose. He didn't lose in 67. He didn't lose in 68. Didn't lose in 69. Didn't lose in 70, 71, 72. Notre Dame wins in 73, and they go on and win the national championship. They would beat McKay again only in 77 when they come out in the green uniforms to win the championship. And then, of course, Lou Holtz would come in and dominate USC. But from when I was a kid, Notre Dame only beat USC in years they won the national championship. 66, 73, and 77. All the other years, including the 74 debacle when they went out to California and were up 24-0 and wound up losing that game by giving up 55 points in the second half. More points surrendered in that second half than Notre Dame scored in the 66 game in all 4 quarters. And McKay just pounded them in that game. And that was Anthony Davis running back a kick, I think, to start the second half, then just going out and just scoring at will. It was just a debacle for Notre Dame. Notre Dame did rally its troop, and Ara did in his final game in an Irish jersey when they upset Alabama in the Orange Bowl, winning the second time, beating the Crimson Tide for the second time in 2 years, and of course winning in the 73 Sugar Bowl, one of the greatest games to this day. I think it's the greatest game I ever saw. 24-23. The game went back and forth. 6 lead changes. You had a run back, a couple big runs in the game, and it came down to Tom Clements throwing a 30-yard pass to Robin Weber on a 3rd and long from Notre Dame's 2 after Alabama had punted the ball and tried to bottle up Notre Dame. And, of course, Bob Thomas hits the field goal prior to that to give Notre Dame the lead, 24-23, with late in the fourth quarter. All this would never have happened probably had Ara not played for the tie. And I got to be honest with you, maybe if Hanratty's in the game, Notre Dame goes for the win. But now he's got a kid who's a diabetic, didn't take his insulin shots. And here's the deal, all right? I'm going to bring this up. So those are the players in the game. Let's just go on with this. All right, here's Michigan State's schedule. NC State was 5-5. Penn State 5-5. They beat them by a collective 70-18. Then he goes in, starts his Big Ten, beats the Illini 26-10, beats a in-state rival Michigan 20-7, beats Ohio State 11-8, and Ohio State only finished the year 4-5. Thumps Purdue, number 9, beats Northwestern in their only shutout of the year, destroys Iowa 56-7, and beats Indiana 37-19 before their game against Notre Dame. Now, I'm going to tell you this. I didn't have the first half, but I will tell you this. Michigan State was bottled up to start the third quarter, all right? 10-0 game. Notre Dame is able to score a touchdown, and then they're able to score the field goal. But in the fourth quarter, here's what happens. Michigan State started on their own 43. Notre Dame defense stops them. They started on their own 48. Michigan State. And Notre Dame stops them. They started on their own 23 late in the game with about 7 minutes ago. Actually, with 7 minutes and 34 seconds, they started at their own 48. They go into Notre Dame territory, and Jimmy Ray is intercepted by Tom Schoen. All right. His first of 2 crucial interceptions. In fact, he had 2 interceptions on consecutive Michigan State drives, which really helped the Irish cause. So they were driving Michigan State, and Ray throws the interception to Schoen. That one was at 7:34 of the fourth quarter. Then they started at their own 20 a little bit later on in the game, and the pass is intercepted by Schoen. This time, Notre Dame drives, and this is where it's 10-10. This is where Michigan State kind of stiffens up. They force Notre Dame on a 3rd and 17 for O'Brien to throw a pass. It's tipped by Bubba. Rocky Bleier is open. I guess either O'Brien never saw him, maybe saw him too late, got the pass off too late. Bubba's huge hands got in the way, and they stopped. Now, the big guy who hit the Joe Azzaro, who hit the field goal to tie the game, he only had 2 successful field goals all year. In fact, this was only his second attempt on the year, and he nails it to make it 10-10. Now he comes out for a 3rd try on the year, and it's just wide right. It had the distance. If you see the YouTube, it does have the distance, but you can tell that, man, I think it was wide from the very beginning and goes wide right. Florida State fans should know that term. So they missed the field goal, 4:43 left. Now, here's the deal. Jimmy Ray was 17 carries, 44 yards first half, gut rushing. yards. All right. This was a tough, and I think this is what is missing on football fans who just don't enjoy defense. This was a gut, man, this was just snot-nosed football. Defense, mano a mano, big plays, coming at big times, forcing punts. And the punts by both sides were bottling up the offense to the point where, they had to play a little bit more conservatively in their own end zone because they didn't want to do anything wrong. There were a number of fumbles. There were a number of interceptions in the game, all the rest of it. But here's what happened on the last drive. 4:43, Ray's on and Michigan State's on their own 20. They lose 5 yards. Now it's 2nd and 15. Ray throws a pass. It's incomplete. At one point in this game, and this is what I mean, and I think it's unfair to Notre Dame and to Ara Parseghian. Ray was 5 of 8, including 2 completions to his primary receiver, Gene Washington, who Dan Jenkins quoted as saying, I was going to be open all day. I knew I could beat these guys. And yet, I think he only had 2 catches on the game, and his last catch was early in the second half. He goes empty for the rest of the game. Empty. So the Notre Dame quarterbacks and safeties and defense just really targeted him in a good way. Didn't target him by hitting him. Just really focused their attention, did a double team, and really bottled up Washington to the point where he was ineffective. To wit, he was 5 of 8 at one point in this game. Jimmy Ray. He finished the game 6 of 17 or 6 of 18. I'm going to say 6 of 17. So he only had 1 more completion out of 9 attempts. Notre Dame stiffened. He had 58 yards. He had a big 20-yard carry in the second half, which kept a rally going for Michigan State, but was really about 18. I think he was like 20 for 61, if I can count and figure out the stats. Notre Dame again bottled him up. They stopped the running game for Michigan State. And here's the deal. Like I said, they started at the 40, their own 43, their own 48. Notre Dame, as a matter of fact, they started at their own 42 in the third quarter and their own 20, and then get bottled up for most part of the fourth quarter. They started at their own 7 and their own 6 in this game, okay? So, and now you're doing it with half of your offensive backfield on the bench, unable to play. They couldn't even go in and just even fake it. So Notre Dame's defense stiffened up. Now, here's the deal. They had, and this is where I get to the final drive. So, a guy named Cavender, sophomore fullback, gets the ball. They have a 4th and 1. So he ran the ball after the incomplete pass. It was 3rd down and 15. He ran for, let's say, 14 3/4 yards. So they just needed a couple inches. Ray gets on the 4th. He gets the quarterback sneak. Then they start a new set of series on this drive. Clint Jones, their running back, a loss of 2 yards, an incomplete pass to Brenner on 3rd and 5. And then let me just see what I put with it. They have to, there was another incomplete pass, I do believe. And now they got to punt the ball. And with a minute and change to go, 1:35, they punt the ball. And Schoen, who had intercepted 2 passes prior to this, goes back. He was their punt returner, fumbles the ball. And Notre Dame still holds on. And they are on their own 30-yard line, like Dan Jenkins has stated in his article in SI, November 1966, probably for November 21st. It always was a Monday edition or whatever like that. But Notre Dame, Michigan State has 4 timeouts still remaining. On the first down, they send O'Brien on a fake up the gut and he bootlegs and is nailed for a 5-yard loss. Michigan State doesn't call timeout. They have 4 timeouts left. They don't even use it. They let the clock wind down. Now they got Notre Dame in a 2nd and 25 on their own 20, 2nd and 15 on their own 25. Notre Dame manages to convert and get a first down. And Michigan State only calls timeout starting with 34 seconds left in the game. O'Brien, who is regarded, he's quoted as being, he's been capably on a quarterback sneak, gets the first down. Schenkel or Wilkinson calls him being capable, doing the job, getting it done. They lose. Bubba Smith tackles him for a loss, and they finally call timeout with 6 seconds left in the game. My whole point is this. Notre Dame gets the ball at their own 30, a minute 35 to go. They know they had just intercepted 2 passes, had thwarted Michigan State time and time again in the fourth quarter at midfield with a couple of interceptions, had just missed a field goal, had just almost muffed the ball away. Technically, it's a muff, not a fumble. Muffed the ball away to Michigan State on the punt. And I think Ara's thinking, wait a minute, let's just get out of here with a tie. It'll be like a win in terms of the pollsters. They'll vote us because we went into their place with a team that had won 10 games last year during the regular season, or 9 during the regular season. They had won 9 straight here, so 18 of 19. We're going to hold them to a tie in their place with all those All-Americans and future NFL draft picks. And here's Ara saying, let's take the tie, go to SC, and see what happens there, because at the time, too, Notre Dame never went to a bowl game, so that SC game was their bowl game. Michigan State couldn't go to the Rose Bowl because they had league rules saying that you couldn't make same appearance 2 years in a row, which was unfortunate for them. But it was the Big Ten hurting Michigan State, not Notre Dame. That wasn't Notre Dame's fault. Who knows what could have happened? They go out, maybe play USC or play UCLA and beat them this time. Now they finished 10-0-1. Notre Dame doesn't make the trip. And maybe there is something different there. Regardless, that's what happened. But Notre Dame had the ball a minute 35. Michigan State never used their timeouts effectively. And Michigan State is yelling at Notre Dame. Well, I look at it this way. You had a number of opportunities. At midfield, you were closing in. All you had to do was maybe take a chance. You did it on 4th and 1. You know, when you think about it, even Michigan State's defense held. And you're saying to yourself, you got 4 timeouts. Maybe go for it on 3rd and 11 or whatever it was. Even if they, or 4th and 11, even if you even missed it, Notre Dame was at the 43. Their own 43. Maybe they go for it, but it wasn't like they were running chunks off on plays. It was just a grind out. You got timeouts to use. And who knows, maybe with a minute and change, minute and 50, you get the ball back now with, let's say, 90 seconds, and Notre Dame would not have gone for it, let's say, on 4th and 5 or 4th and 3 at your 43. Too far away. Maybe they punt the ball and now try to bottle you up, but at least you got the ball, and maybe with 3 plays left, with about 20 seconds left in the game. 1966, no matter what the pundits say, no matter what Michigan State fans say, and no matter how much criticism Ara Parseghian suffered on that or was barraged by, he actually made the right decision going for the tie. With a diabetic for a quarterback who forgot his insulin, with players hurt, his starting staff, starting backfield hurt, his center having to come out. I forgot to mention that. Bob Guttier, their center, which is a big part of any offense. Talk to anybody, and they know that the center is kind of like the quarterback of the line, and that handoff is so crucial. Hurt for the game with an ankle injury. Michigan State, home team, Duffy Daugherty, a throng of 80,000. Yeah, The Irish settle for the tie. But when you think about it, they didn't settle for a tie. They earned a national championship on that cold, gray, dreary day in East Lansing, Michigan. Notre Dame 10, Michigan State 10. This is Will O'Toole of Park Ridge Sports History, bringing you my take on one of the greatest games of the century, Notre Dame, Michigan State. Thanks for watching. Be here next week. Bye now.